Farmers of Europe, if there's a bustle in your hedgerow this summer, don't be alarmed now. It's just an EU official coming to counter greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, should you be alarmed? Now that the European Union has pledged to cut emissions 55% by 2030, farmers in particular may be in the firing line. Why? A little gas called methane that packs a global warming punch. A US senator called it CO2 on steroids because it's dozens of times more powerful, but only lingers for about a decade. Last month, the United Nations recommended that the fastest, easiest way to limit global warming in the next 10 years is by cutting methane. And 40% of the world's methane emissions come from the agriculture sector. We're talking about cow and sheep burps, piles of steaming manure, but also things like rice cultivation. Now, the European Union is already facing tough negotiations to apply greener rules to farming across the bloc. But how far is it willing and able to go to move that methane needle down? Limiting the number of animals farmers are allowed to raise, requiring them to feed their cows and sheep garlic and seaweed to make each burp less polluting, forcing farmers to breed for the cleanest cows. All of these questions and more we hope to attack today. I'm Margrethe Hernandez, energy reporter at POLITICO, and welcome to this event on methane emissions and farming. We've got a great panel for you today, but first I would like to turn attention to a message from our sponsor, Royal DSM.
Hi, I'm Edith Schippers, president of DSM in the Netherlands. DSM is a company on a mission: health through nutrition for people and planet. And that is why I, as a consumer, want to buy sustainably produced products with low carbon footprint. I see a lot of labels, but how can I compare? And that brings me to my first question to the panel. How can the EU, together with the value chain, enable me as a consumer to make a sustainable choice? Of course, the real action to improve sustainability takes place on the farm. But how to make sustainable farming economically viable? Art van Veen is a Dutch dairy farmer that already farms sustainable. Earlier, I asked him what he has done to improve sustainability on his farm and what he needs to improve even further.
The stable where you're standing now is about 6.5 years old. When we built this stable, you only had to focus on the cow. So a cow needs a lot of space. So a cow must be free to go where she wants to be. So here she can milk when she wants, here she can eat when she wants, here she can lay down when she wants. She even can go outside when she wants. So far we did a lot for sustainability using the three main themes. Animal welfare, and biodiversity and climate. Climate is one of the key topics for sustainability on this farm. And to reach that goal on climate, we have a lot of solar panels. And we are self-sufficient for electricity on this farm. And we also only have grassland here around the farm. So grassland, when you don't plow it, grassland is able to store some extra carbon dioxide. At the end, we have a very low CO2 footprint per kg of milk. We manage a grassland by only feeding the cows grass around the farm here. And part of our grass is mowed later, at the end of the spring. So we have a lot of biodiversity, we have a lot of birds, meadow birds, we have a lot of flowers, a lot of weeds. Biodiversity is a part of farming. So if I don't have biodiversity, I don't have a farm. It's good that Europe is taking a lot of action for sustainability, for example, on the theme of methane emission or lowering the methane emission. But if I want to reach that goal of lower methane emissions, there needs to be something done. I'm willing to lower my methane emission, but if the European government is thinking about how to reach that goal, not just think about new rules, but think about how to reward a farmer. Because every farmer is willing to do more, but if you want to do an investment, it needs to be paid. We are part of a program with a small premium for consumers. They pay on their price in the supermarket. So at this moment, I can pay all my investments with a little premium from the consumers in the supermarket. Everybody has to take his responsibility for the food transition. So a farmer needs to do that, the consumer needs to do that, but also the politicians need to do that. My call to the European government is to think about the farmer's perspective and to reward the sustainable farmer.
Thank you, Art, for your clear explanation. That brings us to the topic of today: how to reduce methane emissions. I think one of the main solutions is to reward the individual farmer generously for his investments in sustainable farming. And it gives me, as a consumer, low-carbon products. So let's make the farmer the front-runner, the innovator, the game-changer. That brings me to my second question. The EU has the Green Deal, the farm-to-fork and methane strategy. But how do we take the farmers along and make them our allies? Thanks for joining us. I am really looking forward to the discussion in the panel.
Welcome back. And as a reminder, if you are on the Politico website watching this event, you can ask questions directly in the little window next to the video, or if you're watching through the Slido app, you can also submit questions there. We're going to kick it off with a poll. The question is, who can have the biggest impact on the transition to more sustainable farming? Is it consumers, farmers, governments, or retailers? Feel free to well, I see there's already a vote for consumers, but we'll see how many more answers come in and give the results as they come. Turning to the panel, we have with us today from the European Commission, policy analyst Nicola de Virgilio. From the European Council of Young Farmers, Vice President Seán Finan. We have Margrethe Jonkman, Global Director of Research and Development at Friesland Campina. And we have a member of the European Parliament from Germany and the Green Party, Jutta Paulus. Thank you all so much for joining me. And I think I would like to kick it off by turning to Mr. de Virgilio to just get a sense of, from an accounting mathematical perspective, since I imagine this is how the Commission is looking into this. We've seen how farmers may have to start importing their CO2 emissions, but how does one account for methane where it's very powerful but doesn't last quite as long? Is there something in the formula that you guys are tinkering with?
Hello, good morning, Eva, and I'm very happy to be here. Joined the Commission quite recently as a policy analyst, as a seconded national expert from from the Italian National Council of Research. And indeed, it's the way we treat methane. And its global warming potential. It's considered is basically one aspect that is taken under consideration when creating policies for helping reducing emissions. We all know that from the analysis and the models used by the European Commission already when he published the long-term strategy to the carbon neutrality in to the climate neutrality, in 2050. We try to identify the different pathway to arrive to this neutrality, and then the result of it is that. Of course, the agriculture, together with other sectors, needs to play its own role in reducing non-CO2 greenhouse gases emissions. And here, in this context, methane is the main greenhouse gases there. Now, the discussion on its role, I think it's very important, and in the way we treat this gas. Is indeed different from the way we might treat this gas that when it's released from energy sector, for example. In agriculture, we have to remember that methane comes from biological processes, and there are some specific challenges and characteristics here that we have to take under consideration. And both the methane strategy and the modeling exercises that the Commission is doing and looked at the specificities of the emissions in the agricultural sectors of methane and try to identify which are the main barriers and challenges here and propose action exactly to face this aspect. At scientific level, there is still a big debate on how to consider the global warming potential of methane. And here the Commission is following this debate and see how include in the calculations the new scientific findings on this. We know that it's is not such a long-lasting greenhouse gases. It doesn't accumulate in the atmosphere in the case of methane from agriculture, if we are not increasing during the year emissions, but still methane has a global warming potential that is there, and which is higher than CO2, and that needs to be considered. So quickly replying, we are aware and following the discussion from the scientific community.
From the scientific community. So that reminds me, the United Nations report that came out last month, and indeed the methane strategy itself acknowledges that even though agriculture has such a big percentage of methane emissions, it's probably the toughest to reduce because it's not as easy as plugging a pipeline. Right, where whatever leaks out is money saved. So I'd be curious to turn to Mr. Finan, who is an actual farmer, who can maybe give us a more human perspective on what it is when someone in Brussels is telling you breed your cow to burp less, if that's what it is, and how it is with you on the ground.
Thanks very much, and thanks to Politico for the opportunity to present this morning or to speak on the panel. I'm a beef farmer from the west of Ireland, and my animals are currently turning an inedible protein in the form of grass into an edible protein in the form of meat, beef in this case. Sustainability is at the heart of my farming business, but as farmers, we look at sustainability from three pillars: economic, environmental, and social. My farm is also quality assured, so it's carbon footprinted. And there's a lot of concern out there amongst the farming community about a lot of the discussions which are happening at the moment around farm to fork, around the methane strategy, and around the ongoing CAP negotiations and discussions. At a farm level, methane is one emission, and what we would like to see as young farmers is that the overall farm footprint would be assessed in that currently the inventory is taking into account the emissions from our farms, but it doesn't in any way credit farmers for those carbon stores which we have on our farms, which really we're talking are very, very significant from in a grassland farm like mine, where we have grassland, where we have hedgerows, where we have soils. So really we need to be considering a gross emissions from a gross emissions perspective rather than a net emissions perspective. And I think that would certainly assist farmers in actually not being seen to be as I won't use the word polluting, but from an emissions perspective that we're currently being viewed and looked at across by the consumer and by the political establishment at both EU and member state level.
Now, Ms. Jonkman, you work for Friesland Campina. That is a global dairy cooperative, if I recall correctly. I'd be curious to hear your perspective, seeing as you work with many farmers producing milk. Do you think that the way forward is kind of strict rules, given that you already are able to impose such rules on the farms that you buy from? Or how do you see this playing out if you want to make farming greener?
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction, and happy to contribute to these events. If you look to Friesland Campina, it's a global dairy company, 11 billion euro net sales, and we have about 11,000 member farmers. And for us as a company and cooperative, sustainability is very important. It's part of our purpose. And if we look at sustainability, like Seán also stated, it has several aspects, and we want to give nutrition to the world. And if we look at dairy, which is a very nutritious food product, we are caring about the socioeconomic aspects, so good living for our farmers, and for now and for generations to come. So we look at the environmental impact, and we have targets on that. We want to give the nutrition, but we also want to reduce our environmental impact. And important in that reducing the environmental impact, you have to take at various aspects of it. It's not only looking at carbon footprint, but also, for instance, at biodiversity, and also looking at animal welfare. And we have to find a balance in that area. And if you look at carbon footprint, and I think that's important for us as a company, for us as a cooperative, if we have targets on carbon footprint, part of that can be reduced by looking at methane. And that's one of the various options in looking at your carbon footprint reduction. And in my opinion, it's very important for a farmer to have a set of tools to reduce your carbon footprint. So you can look at methane, you can look at your manure, you can look at your genetics of your cow, but don't set targets specific on methane, but at a slightly higher level. So give a framework where a farmer should act in, and we all should help and work on getting various tools, various methods available to reduce the carbon footprint at the farm, including methane.
Okay, so if I heard you correctly, you're not necessarily in favor of a methane cap on farms. I think I heard that toward the end.
That's correct, because I think a farmer looks at his farm and says, hey, in one farm, the best way is, for instance, to look at feed or feed additives, but on another farm, it could be much better, given his type of farm, to look what can we do with manure digestion at my farm. So I think a farmer is an entrepreneur and should look at what fits best to my way of farming, what is possible for me. And don't go ahead to the micro level or go to the details only of methane.
All right, fair enough. Now, you mentioned manure digestion. It's a perfect segue. For some who may not be aware at home, methane, the gas that steams off manure and is burnt by cows, is also what you may know as natural gas, which is piped into your homes to heat apartments. So there's been a lot of discussion as the EU moves toward, let's say, some would say greener energy sources, some would debate just how green it is, but the possibility for farmers to start getting those bacteria to digest the manure from their animals and have that feed into our pipelines so that we don't have to go drill oil and gas in the North Sea, for example. I'd be curious to hear from Representative Paulus, because as a member of parliament, you are really there trying to craft, the whole circular economy of this. How can we, let's say, take the emissions in one area and count them in another place, or what kind of pathways make sense? Is this something at all that you're discussing with your fellow members in Parliament?
Yes, thank you very much. We just more or less started the discussions on the European Parliament's own initiative report on methane, and I'm the responsible person for the Greens in ENVI and also in ITRE, so in the Environmental Committee and in the Committee for Industry, Research and Energy for all the energy-related issues. Just as a short remark, because that might have been there might have been a misunderstanding. Of course, methane as such does not accumulate in the atmosphere, as it has a half-life of only 11 or 12 years, but it is degraded to CO2. And of course, CO2 does accumulate. So at the end of the day, we will have an effect by methane emissions in the long term also, because it is turned to CO2. And as has already been mentioned, it is short-lived and has an extremely strong effect in these years. So if you look at a 20-year time frame, it's more than 80 times as strong as CO2. I think what we are all a bit shying away of is the elephant in the room, which are the animal numbers, actually, because even if you are very efficient in feeding your cow and giving the cow only so much food that it is used in the most efficient manner, we actually have really a lot of livestock in Europe. We have so much livestock that we have to turn to Latin America to feed it. And there has been a lot of examples of cows on grassland, which are actually very good for biodiversity and also for storing carbon in the soil. But the majority of livestock does not live on grassland in Europe, which is really a pity, because it's not only better for the climate and biodiversity, but also for animal welfare. So I think that we should not look only at the individual methane footprint of the single animal, but on the methane footprint of the whole manner of production. And there, I think we have unfortunately missed a chance in the revision of the Common Agricultural Policy, where I would have loved to see a large premium for animals that are being kept on grassland, out on pasture, in the free space, which is, of course, also good for animal welfare. And yes, this comes with a price, but our way of production comes with a price too, only it's not reflected on the price tag. It is being paid by future generations, and that should not be our way of working.
Now, two questions that arise in my mind. One, obviously, now that you mentioned the work is started on a parliament version of the methane strategy, do you anticipate that you will try and insert maximum numbers of animals per, be it square meter or farm, or other sort of cap on the number of animals per exploitation?
Well, actually, I don't expect that we will find a majority for that. So basically, my colleague Per Holmgren, who will be following the file in the AGRI committee, he has already told me, well, of course, I will try to push for stronger limits for animal farming, but the AGRI committee is very conservative, let's call it that way, when it comes to limiting animal numbers. But what I think we should do is that we put into the game the placement of methane in the Industrial Emissions Directive, because it is not only a short-lived climate force, it also contributes to air pollution because it's a precursor for ozone. And therefore, we have a large impact on the health of people and the environment through the ozone, which is being formed by methane. So what we need is, which has already been mentioned, we need a good treatment of manure so that the methane is actually captured and can be used. But we also need strict limits in the Industrial Emissions Directive in order to make sure that it is not only a financial incentive to use the methane, but it's also an obligation through environmental law.
There's two things that I've heard. One, industrial emissions, and two, you mentioned that, at least from your perspective, there's so many cows grazing that we're having to export to Latin America. There's just too much. Now, I'll turn in a second.
No. We have to import food from Latin America to feed the cows which are in the stables, which are not out on the pasture.
Thank you for clarifying that. Because what I was going to say was that in the industrial emissions sector, we're talking very much about a carbon border adjustment mechanism, right, to keep sort of polluting products from coming in. And I wonder whether Mr. Finan, as a farmer, you are being placed in the position where you're being asked to implement more pricey forms of agriculture, and yet we're importing beef and milk from other places in the world that don't have these same constraints. Do you envision a situation in which the European Union might give you a boost by either requiring the same standards for the products we import, or imposing some sort of a carbon or methane tax on what is imported?
Well, at a minimum, there should be equivalent standards for any imports which come into the EU. As a farmer, I have to comply with cross-compliance. I have to comply with animal health and welfare regulations, and indeed a raft of other very, very important aspects to the running of my farm. But I produce a product that won't be able to compete with imports from certain non-EU states. So we have the Commission talking about a Mercosur deal, a Mercosur proposal about importing beef products into the European Union, which are from countries which don't have the same standards in terms of production, in terms of environmental, in terms of climate. So I can't compete with that product. That product is directly impacting on my viability as a farmer because it is competing with my product, which is also on the European market. So we can't have double standards in terms of implementation from the EU Commission, where on one hand they are putting in, and there's a raft of requirements in terms of my production system, and also the farm to fork strategy sets out significant responsibilities on the shoulders of the farmer, and then on the other hand, where they allow significant quantities of imports of similar product into the European Union, which directly competes with meat, which doesn't have to comply with the same requirements. That is a complete and utter contradiction in terms of the approach from the EU Commission and the European institutions. And we cannot tolerate that as a farming community, because I won't be in business. I won't be able to be economically viable if that is the case. The farm to fork strategy does set out many criteria, and while we agree with the principle of reductions in terms of chemical usage, in terms of all other aspects, organic farming increases, the implementation of the farm to fork strategy can't be all on the shoulders of farmers either. Like, we believe that the consumer isn't taking any responsibility, the retailer, the processor, in terms of the implementation of the strategy. So on one hand, you have Commissioner Timmermans pushing for a farm to fork strategy in the EU Green Deal, while on the other hand, you have another wing of the EU Commission pushing a trade policy which directly is contravening the principles contained within that very EU Green Deal and farm to fork strategy. So I think it's a complete and utter contradiction and cannot be tolerated, because it means that we will, and the EU Commission's answer and response to this would be that, we will implement equivalent standards, but we have no guarantees and no reassurances from previous occasions that this is going to happen. And it also extends to the environmental footprint of the products which are coming in. As we know, in some of the South American countries, there's rainforest being removed, and lots of other environmentally degrading aspects to incentivize this production, which is currently finding its way across to Europe. So I hope that answers the question that you posed.
That definitely does. And I'd like to turn back to Mr. De Virgilio from the Commission, because we had a few things floated. I posited the cow border adjustment mechanism. We've heard from Mr. Finan. He wants to have his farm's emissions absorbing capabilities counted. Representative Paulus has said, potential limits on animals. Are any of these being seriously considered by the Commission, or what are you guys hammering into the standards that are going to be unveiled later this year?
Yeah, thank you. It's really a lot of inputs from all the panelists actually for the reflection. I can say that that these aspects are actually taken into consideration, and I can see several common understanding and the Commission priorities going in several lines that already mentioned by the panelists. The international dimension, it's very important, and it's also recognized in the strategy, in the methane strategy, but also in the farm to fork strategy. Standards for the production of food in Europe are very high, and I think that it's a basic principle that products that Europe will import in the future will have at least a comparable standard in this case. In the context of the methane strategy, there is a specific the international dimension. It's quite well there, because particularly for methane, the main sources of production at the global level. Climate change is a global problem. It's not only for Europe. It's not happening in Europe. So the international actions dimension in the methane strategy is very high. And in the for the agricultural sector specifically, we will continue working within the context of the COP26 and the sharing best practices within the also climate and clean air coalition initiatives. There are several international fora which the Commission is already inside, and will try to prioritize boosting the standards that we want to have in Europe, also at international level. Other actions in the methane strategy are really exactly recognizing what has been mentioned already on the need to as well to take the problem in a holistic way, and for example, there's rewarding the efforts of farmers for reducing emissions in general, or increasing and protecting the sink. We also have an initiative which is also mentioned in the farm to fork strategy, and in the methane strategy as well, which is the carbon farming initiative, for which we will try to have a communication by the end of the year. And then expert group that we will start implementing the first one already at the end of August, having a look at all mitigation potentials of all mitigation practices for all the farming systems. And then the flexibility idea already mentioned, it's very important in the farming sector, and that is also considered there. And on the other hand, we want to help calculating, identifying the main sources at farm level. And here also we have another work that the AGRI is doing with the study for including a greenhouse gases calculation module within the farm sustainability tool, for example, to help farmers to set their to tailor strategies in reducing emissions at farm level. Thank you. Think that, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please finish.
No, I finished. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Now, I see that a few questions have come in just based on the discussion we're having now. And it sounds like it would be perhaps a question either for the Commission or for Ms. Jonkman. It's what was the effect of the reduced milk quota in the past 20 years on emissions? I have to admit, this is outside of my expertise. So if somebody knows what that means and would like to maybe explain in a sentence or two, I'd gladly take that and then hear the answer if anybody happens to know.
From my perspective, if I may, I'm also not aware of a direct link between of it with the methane reductions, but I can say that looking at methane emissions in the agricultural sector starting from 1990 to 2018, which is the last year in which we have most updated data from emissions reported by member states, overall methane emission from agriculture decreased of 22%. That is basically arrived in this decrease happened particularly in the first year, in the first decade. And then now we are observing to a variability, yearly variability, such as a kind of stabilization, sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing. For example, in 2018, we have a small decrease. And looking at this data, probably I don't see that there might be a big impact of the milk quota on the trend of reducing emissions of methane. But of course, this needs to be analyzed and try to see better what is the causal effect of it. And one last thing that just to remember, to conclude the link also with what has been discussed previously, we have to remember that methane, when it degrades into the atmospheres, is CO2. Then without going into technicalities, but this CO2 was previously in plants absorbed with the photosynthesis. So also this CO2 is part of a cycle. I mean, it's important that we all know how the system works, because then we can set the best strategy. And then here, the role of grasslands and pastures and working on grasslands it's very important, which is strictly connected with the livestock rearing.
Okay, I think I still want to go to Ms. Jonkman regarding the milk quota, because I imagine it affected your business as well. And I'd just be curious if there are any experiences there on whether that might have unintended or beneficial economic effects if it does turn out to help reduce emissions.
Well, I just want to echo what was just said. If I look at carbon footprint reduction, then you see in the recent years continuous decrease in carbon footprint if I look at milk per liter milk. So on global level, there is minus 10%. And if you look in Europe, it's even more. And if I look at, for instance, the various companies in Europe, and if I look also in the future, many of the dairy companies had set clear targets on carbon footprint reduction. And if I look at Friesland Campina, it's in 2030, it's minus 30%. That's the target. And we would really like everybody's help to realize that. Our farmers have different tools to different measures to work on. Also, one was just mentioned before, if you look at carbon sequestration in grassland, but there are also many opportunities which are from the scientific field developed and looked at. And it's very important that we in Europe work on these options and have clear outcomes on what it will mean for carbon footprint reduction at a farm. And if it also has effects on other aspects of environmental impact, for instance, on biodiversity, on nitrogen, but also, on the other hand, what it means for animal welfare, for the quality of milk. So you have to have an integrated view on it and look at the various options which will become available in science to be able to pass them on as tools to our farmers. What we also do as a company, and maybe to give you a kind of view on how we can help the farmers in that area, is translate it to their own farm. So we have an app in Friesland Campina for our farmers where they can look at various options and look what does it mean for my farm, how much do I need to invest, but also what kind of carbon footprint reductions that will give. So on one hand, in the past, in the last decade, we decreased quite a lot in carbon footprint, but also for the coming years, and that we think is our responsibility as a company. Our farmers want to do that, is to reduce further and further. But also, I think what we should not forget, if I look at Europe and if I look, for instance, at Friesland Campina in the Netherlands, our carbon footprint compared to many other regions is already quite low. If I look at milk, that's about 50% of the global average. But we always want to be better and look at how we further can reduce. Well, and for instance, you can stimulate that. If I look at just at the meadow behind me, we give our farmers a premium, price premium, if the farms are meadow farming. And in the Netherlands, it's around 85 to 9% of the cows are meadow farmers.
Well, that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned a premium that you pay your farmers. What sort of incentives and then what sort of, let's say, sustainability requirements do you impose on them? I mean, are we talking solar panels on the roof of the farm? Are we talking, feeding garlic and seaweed to them? And are there any lessons learned as far as, does it affect the milk quality? Do we have a garlicky taste in the milk, for example? Or, what are you seeing working with the farmers that you do?
Yeah, as we just discussed before, there are many different kinds of tools and it should fit the farm. In some farmers, you can have solar panels on the roof or windmills or have their own manure digester, or in a small cooperative have a manure digester. And some farmers prefer to look at feed and optimizing their feed. And as you said, you always should look when you apply new type of feed. What does it mean for the milk composition, but also for the animal health, the health of a cow? And the ones that are used in the Netherlands are always checked on this item, and that everybody is sure that it's for animal health, for the health of the cow, but also for the milk composition, it will have no impact.
I'd like to turn back to Representative Paulus because in some of our previous discussions, you mentioned a bit of we discussed a bit of the tug of war between the various interests, energy versus biodiversity versus farming. And I would like to know where the discussions in the Environment and the Energy Committee are as far as perhaps incentivizing the farmers to turn the manure into energy, or is that not necessarily what your party would prefer in terms of, let's say, the hierarchy of needs as far as how we need to make this circular?
Yes, actually, we do prefer using the manure and really having this positive impact, this double positive impact, so to speak, because you will not only have this effect of not having the methane emissions from the manure, but also being able to use the energy. And there, of course, what we as Greens favor, and what also Ms. Biraki pointed out when I spoke to her, is that we do not want to have this effect being limited to bigger farms, but especially also for smaller farms, because of course it's a good incentive also for farmers to have an additional income, so to speak, because right now they're more or less making a good or bad living from having to rely on the CAP, and a lot of them would like to have additional possibility of earning money, of course. And so therefore for them it is vitally important to have this additionality. What we really should look at is that we are not creating incentives to stay on larger feedstocks, so to speak, so that it's great if you want to serve your own farm, but you should not be locked into large feedstocks just by having to supply the biogas. So inside the Environmental Committee, I think the debate is quite open when it comes to using methane from manure, and also inside the Energy Committee, although we have not really debated on it yet, but I think it's a no-brainer, so to speak. I'm not sure whether it has been already debated in the AGRI Committee, to be very honest.
Okay. Now, a few more questions have just trickled in now. One on how far we have to go to get reliable data on actual sources of methane. Now, I'm aware from the energy sector, there are now satellites in space that can sort of spot pipelines leaking methane. What I don't know, and maybe Mr. Di Virgilio does, is whether there is something similar for the agricultural sector, or whether we do, how much confidence do we have in the methane numbers that we have?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is actually one of the main points and main challenges that we have in the agricultural sector when trying to define a strategy for reducing methane. We probably, as in the energy sector, we will not be able to use satellites for measuring methane emissions in agriculture. The best way is actually to estimate them using models and using emission coefficient linked with the practices implementation and with mitigation practices. And here we need still a little bit of research for some of the mitigation practices, for example, for feed additives and so on. What is important is that we have more data, more activity data, that we can link this activity data at farm level or at member state level to coefficients. And now in the current situation, member states where they are reporting emissions from the agricultural sector, methane emission in particular from the agricultural sector, we are at a level which is still a little bit not fine enough to detect, for example, the implementation at farm level of good practices, and this is recognized, and indeed in the farm force strategy, there is an action in which we are trying to convert the farm accountancy data network, which is basically collecting data on economic parameters, let's say, to farm sustainability data network, where we will have the possibility to propose to collect data also linked with the sustainability at farmer level. And then we are in the methane strategy as well, to get every time we will try to assess the effectiveness in the mitigation potential of different mitigation practices. We will also try to define, assess, study how this the implementation of these practices are reflected in the inventory. So far, still not there. Still a lot of work needs to be done in this aspect.
Now, when you talk about collecting activity data, just to be clear for someone who is not knees deep in this all of the time. Are you talking about having farmers put in how many cows they have and how many sheep, and there's an algorithm that says, for this size of cow, this is how much methane, or what do you mean when you talk about collecting activity data to get a better picture of our methane emissions?
Yeah, it's basically exactly that, in the sense that now this data, more or less, in terms of number of cows and also races and typologies of cows, it's already available at statistical level by member state, and they are actually using this data and link typology of cows with a conversion factor to methane and N2O emission as well, and production of manure. But the idea is to go beyond that. Is basically to understand how these cows are fed, what is the feeding strategy of these cows, if farmers are using covered manure storage, if farmers having a biodigester in their farms, have basically know exactly what farmers are doing, and then to have a more reliable data picture on the emissions. This is not only important to show, analyze progresses or not in the emissions, but also it's important for the farmers because most of the time having be aware and then of what you are doing, and then using this in digital tools, for example, here the digitalization can help a lot to better calculate what you are doing at farm level in terms of emissions. It can also help you, the farmer, to change its management practices, and sometimes even reducing costs of management, for example.
Okay, just one quick question. You threw out the word digitalization there at the last second. What exactly does that mean in the context of the farm and counting emissions? Is there some sort of, methane counter? It's going to be installed?
It means, for example, the possibility for farmers to use all the different tools, for example, that are already there for calculating greenhouse gases emissions at farm level. There are several ones that are already used in different initiatives. For example, just to mention the carbon AGRI of the label Bas Carbone in France, where they have a tool which is called Cap2Air, that farmers are using to calculate their greenhouse gases emissions, and even to calculate credit, for example, in reducing emissions, and then they can sell this credit within a system created by the French government. These tools are already there, and then the digitalization basically helping to connect different databases, different algorithms, and then gives, they are basically decision supporting tools for farmers and helping farmers in eco-designing their management.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'm going to go to Ms. Jonkman because I see she has something to say on the topic.
Yeah, maybe just we put it into practice in Friesland Campina. Our farmers have to fill in every a couple of months the kind of feed they have, the kind of cows, the kind of soil, and based on that, you will calculate the carbon footprint, but also look at other aspects of environmental impact. And on the one hand, you can perform the carbon footprint per liter milk, but also if you aggregate it on company level. So we know where we are as a company, the farmer knows where he or she is, but it gives them also, as just said before, we can show them what are our options for mitigation. So if they want to if they want to chase something in their feed, they immediately can see how much will it decrease my carbon footprint, but also what effect has it on nitrogen or phosphorus, and they can relate it to the cost they have. One aspect which is still not everything is still, we are still able to measure. What we can measure, and for instance, what we are doing trials with some other companies, is looking at feed or feed additives, and then you can measure, for instance, at a farm with a green feeder, how much methane reduction you will get. One thing which is still quite difficult to measure is carbon sequestration in soil, and how and what can we do to enhance it, how much effect has it on different soil. But there we are working together with scientists how we can make steps in that area. But for me also as a scientist, it's very important to measure and do it fact-based, where you can make the steps together.
All right, a few more questions. Thank you for that. Are coming in, and I think they are directed to Mr. Finan. But I'd like to just get a sense. We're talking a lot about these technologies, a lot of accounting that is maybe separate from the normal farming work that you would like to do to run your business. I'm curious, how much time do you spend having to do these types of inputs? Have you invested in something like a manure digester? If no, what are the barriers or what are the concerns there? How much does this apply to your day-to-day life?
No, I haven't invested in a manure digester. Unfortunately, for farmers to take up and deploy a lot of those types of technologies, investment support is required. In some member states, investment support is available, whereas in Ireland, investment support for that type of technology is not available. My main focus, obviously, is in caring for my animals and carrying out my daily activities on the farm. And that does take up a lot of my time, but a lot of the practices can be assisted through the use of technology. Young farmers are certainly open to embracing technology in order to help and assist with all of this, the aspects that we're talking about here. For instance, I'm using grass measurement. We're obviously regularly testing our soils in terms of their fertility and at their optimum fertility in terms of being as productive as possible. We're obviously recording the weights of our animals on a regular basis to ensure that they're performing right. We're reducing the length of the grazing increasing the length of the grazing season to minimize the amount of time that the animals are in housing. We're using cover crops. We're promoting biodiversity by hedgerow management and by extending the field boundaries. So there's lots going on at a farm level, and I think a lot of the time policymakers fail to recognise the significant amount of work that's happening at a farm level. However, the big challenge we face is that there's a lot of science, research and development work to be done in all the areas we talk of this morning, in order to get reliable data which then can be used to actually give us a very true picture of what's happening. And that comes back to my original point. What's the carbon sequestration potential of my hedgerows? What's the carbon sequestration potential of my grasslands, my soils? And that should all be all used to give an overall carbon footprint of my farm. And obviously my animals are emitting methane, but what volume of methane are they emitting? And then what sinks have I got that can offset that emission? And that's where a lot of work is required in terms of research to get that data and information together, so the farmers aren't crucified as being emitters while not being recognised for being sequesters. I think the other big complication and area to note is that there are many different farming systems. I operate in a grass-based system. I'd love to be getting a premium for my grass-fed production, but I don't get a premium for my grass-fed production. I get the same payment as someone that's on an intensive indoor finishing system. So there's lots of different farming systems in Ireland, but indeed across Europe, and there's lots of different land types. So it all makes it quite complicated in dealing with this particular area that we speak of, and dealing with this on a more holistic basis, which mightn't always work. There might have to be individualized solutions at individual levels in order to deal with the issues we face.
Absolutely. And I mean, the questions keep pouring in. These debates can go on endlessly, right? We talk about wanting to restrict or have the same standards for meat coming in. And then you have people saying, well, would a farmer Finan be so keen to have similar restrictions slapped on the soya that's imported? So, I mean, clearly.
Well, I'd like to answer that one because it is a very important aspect. Europe isn't self-sufficient in protein. And there needs to be a lot of work done at a European level to enhance and increase our production of protein. And I don't agree with the import of significant volumes of soya, but unfortunately we don't have the volumes of proteins available at a European level, which necessitates that import. So it is an area which Europe needs to consider strongly and put measures in place that will help and assist us become self-sufficient in protein. because that will provide opportunities and alternative opportunities for farmers as well, that can potentially grow these protein sources, which can be used in their animal feed. So I think I saw that question on your list, and it is an important consideration, but it's not getting away from the fact that the standards which are exhibited in many South American countries around and that we're directly competing with are completely and utterly different to and poles apart from what we have to comply with. So it's not a like-for-like situation. I'm delighted that the price of Brazilian beef has risen dramatically in the last number of weeks, because that means that it won't be coming to Europe this summer, which means that I more than likely will get a decent price for my beef this summer, because I won't be competing with a product that's of more inferior quality. So we are also very open to the world markets, and small situational changes and pricing changes can have a dramatic impact on my livelihood and be the difference in me actually being financially viable one year and not the next year, which is something which the broader consumer has no acknowledgement or awareness of whatsoever.
Fair enough. I'd like to turn to Representative Paulus, because there is a question here about the CAP negotiations, and clearly the Member of Parliament Whisper Network is alive and well. Do you have any information on why the farm sustainability tool for nutrients, which is aimed at gathering these sort of flows of data, was knocked out?
I'm very sorry. I'm not part of the negotiations, and I'm just following rather well, not very closely. So I'm looking at the specific issues which are close to my heart, which is of course biodiversity, nutrient flow to water. But I'm very sorry, I cannot tell you anything on this specific tool. I would have to rely on Martin Häusling, who is doing the negotiations for us. I can ask him though.
Fair enough. I would, though, then like to quickly turn back to Mr. Di Virgilio, because there is a question about whether the Commission can support the sharing of data. You mentioned earlier that different countries already are collecting information on the cow breeds, etc. Is there a plan to get those countries sharing that information with one another and helping to sort of create a unified system that might help reduce methane emissions?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, on the FAST tool, in the initial Commission proposal, it was part of the conditionality as GAEC, but it's still there so far. It's part of the, and then it was compulsory for farmers to have it. But now it's part of the AGRI, of the advisory system. So it's still there. So it can still be used by farmers, and we'll see. But it's more voluntary. So let's see how better we can have a strategy for increase the use of this tool in Europe. On the data, most of the data that are used for the calculations of greenhouse gases are publicly available, are basically in Eurostat or in other databases which are publicly available. And also in the database managed by the European Environmental Agency. Other data might be useful for improving the reliability of the calculations. For example, on the actual land use at parcel level, for example, on which kind of management practices, tillage practices applied. It is zero tillage, conservative agriculture. Do we have cover crops or not? Some of these can also be detected with the use of remote sensing tools, and yes, the Commission is working on try to set standards at European level to integrate all the different possibility and fluxes of data. Remember, for example, the existence within the Common Agricultural Policy of a big database that is not database for managing the payment, which is the land identification parcel system. There is also a work of the Commission with member states in helping make this data available to the authorities at national level that are making the calculation for the greenhouse gases emission. So I think that in the future, both in the methane strategy, but also in the climate debate, the need to improve the availability of data is there, and then there are several initiatives to make it happen in the next few years.
And just from your position working with the Commission currently, do you feel the political pressure at all, or do you feel the concern that the technology workarounds like feed, et cetera, are still not exact? And then a lot of it is also just, political. Would the Commission really kind of, put a cap on all of that, tell everyone to go vegan, for example? If you can maybe answer in a very short amount of time, and then I'll try and wrap up. I'm conscious of time, but.
The pressure on the sustainability, it comes already from, let's say, it's not a pressure, it's an ambitious that we are from the Green Deal general principles, and we are trying, and I can see that the Commission is trying to align all the main policy tools with this higher ambition and sustainability, which is applying to all the sectors and all products, and not only agriculture. And we are trying to define a coherent approach of the different strategies. I think that each of these strategies we don't have to look at them in isolation, but they are part of a broader, let's say, strategy framework, which is the Green Deal, and all the sustainability dimensions are taken on board: economic, social, and environment, and the different strategy: biodiversity, European forest strategy, methane strategy, adaptation strategy, which is also very relevant for the farming sector. With this, all of them, we try to keep coherence with the overall ambitions that is set by the Green Deal. The general idea is that to try to transform to use the opportunity for transforming the sustainability transition in an economic opportunities for farmers as well. And with everything that has been mentioned today can be said as that, linking circularity as well, bioeconomy, reduction of emissions, and added value to products that can be recognized by the society.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have to bring this to a close, but before I do, I would like to ask each and every one of you for one wish that you would like to see accomplished by the end of this year that you think will help bring methane emissions down and push for sustainable agriculture. Start with Mr. Finan.
I think that, first of all, we need to have a cap proposal agreed. That's very, very important to give stability to farmers. But I think the cap needs to refocus. It has become an environmentally focused policy away from a food-based policy, which it was before. So that would be my main wish, that the cap would be agreed to give some certainty in terms of the future schemes which are going to be rolled out as part of it, and to assist farmers to plan for the future.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jonkman, your wish for methane and farming for this year.
I have various wishes, but one important one is look at it in a holistic approach. So look at carbon footprint and take into account methane, but also look at the other side of the balance, look at nutrition. How much nutrition, if you look at protein, and quality of protein, but also how many minor components food will give. It's about a balanced diet what we need to achieve with minimal environmental impact. And I would like to have the support to look for scientific tools, help to realize the ambitious goals we have all together, to do it fact-based and give new opportunities.
Representative Paulus, your wish.
My wish would be that we actually do a proper accounting of methane emissions also in the agricultural sector, and that we deploy solutions that are already there. For example, this device that is covering the nostrils of cows which are on the pasture and photocatalytically degrades the methane that they breathe out, because there we could still keep the animals outside and at the same time reduce the methane emissions. Thank you.
And Mr. Virgilio, your wish for the year.
In addition to what already said by panelists, actually, my wish is that to complete the picture, I would like to see a lot of piloting project implemented on the ground, because it's really what can help farmers in the neighbors to see that there are benefits, to see that there are opportunities, and then to increase as much as possible the uptake and make use of the CFP tools that are already there for helping in building, piloting on the ground examples. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like the results of our poll just came in. We have 147 responses. 39% believe that it is governments that can have the biggest positive impact on the transition to more sustainable farming. After that, consumers, farmers, and retailers. So leaders of the EU, your work is before you, MPs as well. Thank you again for tuning into this political event on farming, methane, and sustainable reduction of emissions. I'm America Hernandez with Politico, and please keep in touch. You can send questions afterward. We're writing stories all the time. Have a great afternoon.